sexual baggage, bringing it into the marriage, and how is that going to affect the union, or one spouse to another, is why are we hearing this from a priest? What does a priest know about bringing sexual baggage into the marriage? And there's a couple things that we know, certainly, just in our experience, about what it means and the ramifications of bringing sexual baggage into the marriage. One of the first things we always point to is the story of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve, after they had eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the first thing that they experienced was shame. And so sexual baggage in a marriage does cause ripple effects, ramifications for the husband and wife, becoming one. For instance, the reason why sex before marriage, breaking that sixth commandment, is a difficulty, especially in dating, is that once the man and the woman become one, if you will, outside the bond of marriage, conversation ceases. In other words, the richness of the interplay between man and woman isn't fully explored. So that conversation, that aspect of the conversation cuts off, and it does stunt, in a way, the growth of their love and their union prior to marriage. So that's something, that we see a lot of times, just whether we're preparing the couple for marriage, but also then years afterwards in the confessional. What happens is, with sexual baggage is that it either stunts the growth of that particular relationship now, but also in the now, but also later on, when sexual baggage is brought into the marriage prior to the meeting of your spouse, it does cause problems for later, because what it invariably leads to is the same thing that Adam and Eve experienced: that shame, that guilt, that doubt. So the most important thing to remember, especially with the difficulties with baggage, is you always have to open that baggage up. And it's a very difficult thing, especially when a man and woman come together, the first couple dates, all you ever want to show them is your good side. Open the car door, get the check, walk them to the door, and then a couple months later, it's see you at the door of the restaurant. And so the thing is that it should not be a fear, hopefully not a fear, to expose that to your spouse. It doesn't have to be on your spouse to be. It doesn't have to be on the first date. Doesn't have to be on the 20th date, but certainly should be discussed before marriage. So that can always be part of your love for one another. The interesting thing, especially with marriage, to remember, whatever the baggage that we bring in, whether it's family baggage, stuff that the spouse did, whatever, is that there is always forgiveness and healing, whether it be from Christ, but also from the one that you love. What happens on the wedding day is that the husband gives his soul, custody of his soul, to his wife. His wife gives custody of her soul to him. And the beautiful thing about that, and what makes marriage last and bonds stronger, is that you're not just exposing and giving them your strengths, you're giving them your weaknesses, your fears, your mistakes, your pain, so that your spouse can love you there. That is where the true bond of marriage is found. And so in the marriage bond, it's not just, in our sexuality is not just genital. And when you give yourself to your spouse in marriage, certainly it's physical, but it's also emotional, it's also intellectual, and it's also spiritual. And with Christ in the marriage there, anything that has transpired before, as long as it's brought honestly to the surface, you will be able to be loved there by Christ and by your spouse. There's two kinds of fear. There's good holy fear. That leads you back to the feet of Jesus, whether it's the confessional, whether it's at Mass, whether it's in your prayer. There's unholy fear. And unholy fear is readily discerned because it leads to more of the same: more shame, more guilt, more hiding, shielding things from your spouse. We always say, tell your husband everything, tell your wife everything, don't be afraid. And certainly history is important, because when we hide those things in fear and shame and guilt, what happens is it comes out sideways. whether it's a hidden fault that we do not realize, whether it's flying off the handle when when your husband leaves potato chips inside the couch, what the myriad of possibilities it could be. So, the point to remember is that if you love your spouse, and because you love your spouse to be, it's best to bring that to the surface so that it can be dealt with easily. And also, you just hear in the news now with Facebook and all the social interaction, a lot of times husbands and wives are finding out things 10, 15, 20 years later before they got married, and I never knew anything about that. So for the sake of the marriage, the strength, your own peace of mind, and the peace of mind of your spouse, anything that we would designate and term baggage, whether it's sexual, emotional, whatever, it's best to bring, especially into the wedding preparation process. Tell your spouse beforehand, now let's go talk to the priest. Because the other thing also is that sexual baggage is not just what I have perpetrated, but a lot of times what has been perpetrated upon the person. Whether it be, when the child was young, whether there was a question of abuse, whether it was, something I was 14 years old and I was dating a 19-year-old, whatever it may be. And when things happen before their time, if you will, and speaking specifically in terms of that sixth commandment, that thou shalt not commit adultery, it does leave a wound, and it does leave a certain bewilderment that can be brought to the surface, and can certainly be, it can be emotionally, physically, mentally, intellectual, spiritual, all of those things, that it can be healed in and through Christ and the love that a husband and wife have for each other.